We're going to get our next speaker's slides put together, and I feel like Dr. Schwartz has really put up with us for what seems like many, many years now, and it's always a little bit of a surprise when she agrees to come back and speak at any of our events, but we're delighted. I'm going to try and see if I can do this off the top of my head here with the title. Dr. Suzanne Schwartz is the Director of the Office of Strategic Partnerships and Technology Innovation at the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health at the United States Food and Drug Administration.
Yay.
But she is really, Christian and I both see her as a mentor, one of the original leaders in this space. She has some incredible accomplishments to discuss with you. But I also just have to say, as an anesthesiologist, there are very few surgeons who I wish I could get the chance to work with over the drapes, because most of them are pretty mean. But in her prior life as a burn surgeon, I'm sure we had a lot of fun in the OR. So we're going to get your slides up here, but thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Suzanne Schwartz.
So while we're pulling up my slides, let me just say that, Let me say that I think I am the first CyberMed Summit groupie. I do believe that I've been at every single CyberMed Summit, from the first ones in Phoenix and then in San Diego and now here. And it's not only just an honor and a privilege and a joy to be part of this, but just to also see the evolution of the use cases, the scenarios that, that have been covered in the summits, and how those very much track along with the work. How will those track with what we are seeing within the ecosystem, from some of the earliest use cases which looked at medical device hacks, actual attacks on medical devices on patients, to really where we've gotten to even today in the discussion around how infrastructure within a healthcare system impacted by a ransomware attack and how that disrupts patient care. This is really crucial to be thinking about this ecosystem in its entirety. And I, for one, appreciate, as a physician as well, the concept behind doing a clinical simulation, because especially, as an adult, that experiential learning, that ability to raise awareness and to put someone in the moment and have them afterwards even think about what occurred, what were the encounters. There's something about that that really sticks with you. And what we have been really trying to do also at the FDA in a lot of our stakeholder outreach is work with the clinician community that may not necessarily always have top of mind the possibilities, the potential for a exploit or an intrusion into whether it's a device or technology or healthcare system, and what that potential impact is to patient care and to patient safety. Ultimately, everything that we do at FDA is really geared towards, through that patient safety lens, and from the device side, from the standpoint of safety and effectiveness. Before I jump in, because I was really going to dive right in today, it was our first opportunity to speak publicly about the new guidance that we just released, the new draft guidance, and yay! Ultimately, that is what most of this presentation is going to be about. I do not want it to be a snooze fest for folks or death by PowerPoint. It is policy. It gets to be dry, so I will try to insert various reasons or things for why we've done what we've done. But I did want to also hit home on a few points that I heard this morning, or reflections through some of the Q&A, because I think that provides a good framing for why FDA has taken the posture that it has, or why FDA has made certain decisions to go in the direction that it has. So I'm just going to refer to some random notes I have here from this morning. Number one, I wrote down in big letters with an exclamation point,
we, meaning FDA, we are not waiting for harm. And I know that from my team, from my former team, Seth Carmody sitting in the back knows that sentence very, very, very well. But it's always come up in past discussions that, well, is FDA going to wait for that first case of a patient or patients to be hurt in order to take some action in terms of being able to put better directives, guidance, protections, regulations in place? And our position has always been, no, we are not going to wait for something to occur to then react to it, but rather the importance of having a proactive posture and to really lean forward. And for that reason, all of the guidance that we've put out, from the earliest pre-market in 2014 to the post-market guidance from 2016, which is a living document, which is a document that we still expect manufacturers to adhere to of course, what's at present, the 2022 new pre-market draft. The point is to really put in place the necessary protections, security measures, design controls, so that we are thinking in advance or anticipating the possibilities of a potential for cyber intrusion or exploit, and do that through the lens, again, of if vulnerabilities are identified, the time to really be addressing those vulnerabilities is when they're identified and when they're assessed in terms of risk, not when that vulnerability has been exploited and there's some consequence to that. So that's been our posture there. Another point that I just wanted to cover, because we touched on it a little bit this morning with regard to device compromise. And we talked a little bit about a device that is not available, and the examples this morning was the CT scan or the cardiac suite where a procedure would be performed. So the very idea, the very possibility that a device is rendered inoperable is a concern for FDA. And we have considered that a significant enough concern in terms of the patient safety risk. Second aspect of device compromise would be that the device isn't performing the way it should be performing. And we've had those other examples in prior CyberMed summits where, either a device delivered some huge, what we call bolus of a drug all at once, as opposed to how it should be on kind of a tapered basis, and that you have an impact as a result of that, which could be lethal. Or another example that was used was the inappropriate cardiac shock for a patient who has a implanted cardio defibrillator. So those are examples as well, where the device is not functioning, is not performing as it should because of a cyber exploit. The third was one that Christian also talked about a little bit this morning. We had some discussion around it, and I think it's worth further underscoring, and that is the concept of data integrity. So I'm not talking here about, again, privacy issues related to data, but I am talking about the fact that medical devices can have data within them or data in transit. And if that data is manipulated, that is data that often the clinician is utilizing in order to inform appropriate diagnostic or therapeutic decisions. So if that data is compromised, if it is interfered with, if it's manipulated, that is the third significant risk or compromise that we are concerned about from cybersecurity, just to kind of put a picture around that. And then the only last thing I wanted to mention, the question came up in terms of global efforts. Are we just talking about the United States, or are we thinking about this in a more holistic, universal or global way? And although I can't speak to specific efforts that may be underway with the WHO, I certainly that has not been visible to us. But we at the FDA lead, together with Health Canada, the International Medical Device Regulators Forum work group specific on medical device cybersecurity. And that is, the IMDRF is a forum that consists of many regulators in countries around the world, as well as representatives representative members of industry, of medical device industry. So together, collectively, we think about, we work on what is that common or harmonized approach that we need to be thinking about as far as, there are no international boundaries here when we're talking about cybersecurity. We really have to have awareness and action taken and measures put in place by device manufacturers, by healthcare organizations, by government that crosses all geographic boundaries. So those were it's just some of the comments that I wanted to make there. Now that I ran out of probably a good 10 minutes or so, let's move on to what I really wanted to focus on primarily today, which is the new draft pre-market guidance that is an update to one that we issued as draft in 2018. And it's a further iteration to the very original one that we issued back in 2014. So there's a progression here. There's a definite evolution. And I'll start off again by saying that this one, again, it supersedes the 2018 draft guidance. When this becomes finalized, because this guidance is what we call not for implementation, it is draft. That means it's open for public comment. There's a docket that is open right now. The comment period formally will go through, I think, July 7th. And then we will look at all the comments and get to a point of finalization of that guidance. When it issues, it will be for implementation. One of the things, and I'll talk about this further on another slide, but one of the novel pieces that we added into this guidance is referenced in the title, and that speaks to the quality systems regulations. So quality system regulation, we've referenced it in our earlier guidance. In the 2014 one, we talked about design controls as important in the pre-market process. But here we're making it that much clearer. We're taking a very clear step in saying that what one does in the earliest phases of design and development, as well as how that entire management of the device and maintenance of that device goes throughout its life cycle, should be aligned with the quality system regulation. So this guidance was written to map towards the importance of manufacturers considering the QSR even before that device goes on the market. It does not mean that the post-market cybersecurity guidance is now null and void. It does not replace the post-market cybersecurity guidance. That, as I said, stands as is. But this speaks to, again, what we had previously hinted to within our very earliest 2014 guidance, which is, the overarching criticality of the QSR, the quality system regulation, in consideration. And we just get a lot more specific about it here in this guidance. Folks who have heard us speak a lot over the years have heard us emphasize over and over again that we have to consider cybersecurity as part of safety and effectiveness. Really closing the loop or, making that link. That is what this particular guidance reflects. Again, aligns, it does a crosswalk with the QSR, the quality system regulations, and it speaks to how devices will undergo review, their pre-market review, considering those, design aspects. We put a lot of detail, a lot of focus in the documentation that's necessary, that's recommended for manufacturers during pre-market. There's a whole section on labeling, and that we'll get into in terms of the software bill of materials as well. And just to also further explain that the revision, the changes that were made in this guidance that was released last week compared to the 2018 one, we're very much informed by the public comment that we received back then. We had also held a workshop in 2019 where people had an opportunity to articulate what their thoughts or feedback were. So it takes into account all of that, as well as, this has been a very rapidly evolving space. And we have seen a lot, we've experienced a lot, we've had to evolve our own thinking as we have gone through a lot of what's occurred in the past 2 years, particularly during the pandemic. And in so doing, really restructured this guidance so that it really, from our perspective, meets the present moment, as well as enough latitude in terms of really thinking ahead, thinking in advance. So I mentioned already that the scope of the guidance is expanded in the sense that it now really very clearly calls out the importance of QSR, meaning that things don't stop, and you don't wipe your hands clean at the time that the device goes on the market, but rather the importance of being thoughtful for what it's going to take for that device to be maintained from a security perspective and remain secureable throughout its lifetime. What are some of the other differences from the 2018 draft? So I'm going to run through these really quickly. There's a lot of detail on these slides. The slides, I think, will be available beyond. Okay, great. So I'm just going to kind of hit the high level. Right, so we reorganized, we restructured this guidance to align with the secure product development framework. And this has been already utilized as a best practice, not only within our sector, within other sectors. We took out something that was noted as risk tiers, TIERS. That was a novel concept that we had introduced into the 2018 guidance. We heard that that created some sense of confusion because there are risk classifications for medical devices that already exist, class 1, 2, and 3, that are that cross over into every area of consideration. And so instead of referring to tiers, we really spoke about how it is important for a manufacturer to do the appropriate testing, evaluation, and documentation commensurate with the cybersecurity risk associated with that particular device. We changed from what we had also in a novel way called a CBOM, a cybersecurity bill of materials, which was inclusive of hardware as well, and pulled that back to SBOM, to a software bill of materials, which includes firmware, but does not include hardware. We wanted that to align with other efforts that are happening across government, across the private sector, as well as with the recent executive order of May 2021 that spoke to SBOM. There's a lot more granularity and detail in this guidance with respect to what manufacturers are recommended to submit as part of their submission to us for a new device. And that allows for also greater transparency. We added in, and I don't know whether this point will necessarily, it's perhaps more nuanced, but we added in within the scope of this guidance investigational device exemptions. These are submissions, IDEs are submissions to the agency in order to conduct clinical trials on devices that have not yet gotten authorization to go on the market. And we think that that just really increases the level of not only transparency, but safety with respect to new devices that are going to go into study before we would then review the study data and determine as to that device being able to be marketed. We are a little stuck. Okay. I don't know this by heart, so. Perfect. All right. So, just this gives you kind of an overview of what the guidance outline is, how it runs through all the different sections. I want to note, and it may be on the next slide, some again of the general principles around, again, cybersecurity being part of device safety, and the idea of building security in as opposed to dealing with it as an afterwards as a bolt-on. Transparency with regard to what will be the software bill of materials and the documentation. Here it is. Okay. The one part that I really wanted to highlight over here was an entire section also that speaks to the importance of threat modeling and the submission of threat modeling in the pre-market documentation as a mechanism for our ability to understand how the manufacturer really evaluated, took a look at what all the potential risks are, vectors, and other means of being able to compromise the device, very much akin to what would be a failure analysis, but from a security perspective. And, we were really pleased with the work that we were able to do in collaboration with the private sector, with the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, with Adam Shostak, who's a threat modeling expert, as well as with MITRE, in holding several boot camps on threat modeling, as well as eventually publishing a playbook on threat modeling, which its intent is to serve as an additional resource. It is not the only way to do threat modeling, but it's certainly a tool to have in one's toolbox. The main point being the idea of using greater rigor and a scientific methodology in order to do threat modeling of devices. And then in terms of, again, use of the SPDF, we provide what that security architecture should look like, the implementation of controls. I'm not going to run through all the appendices, although I do have backup slides on that, but you get a picture for what it is that we want to really be able to see in terms of the global system view, the multi-patient harm view, updatability, patchability, and security use case view. And I'm going to keep on going for now. All right. One of the concepts that we've emphasized a lot, and this goes back even to the 2019 workshop that we convened, was the criticality around transparency in what, in everything that gets done. And transparency, how that relates to, for example, labeling and software bill of materials. There's been a lot of attention on the importance of end users, owners and operators of infrastructure, really understanding what are the ingredients, what are the component parts within the systems, the devices, the technologies that they're operating. And the reasons are obvious. The only way that one can really effectively do asset management, the only way that one can really get to doing risk assessments is by understanding exactly where different potentially vulnerable components reside, and hence, we don't want to have healthcare operators, in the dark as far as not knowing where it is that they should be putting their attention, focusing their attention, or prioritizing the types of risk mitigations that can be done in order to be able to best protect their systems, their facilities from, from potential intrusion or attacks. We also put a fair amount of focus on vulnerability management plans. Now, obviously, that's also something that is inclusive in our post-market guidance. We talk a lot in the post-market guidance around what it means to do coordinated vulnerability disclosure and what it means to have processes and policies in place for that, and how to consider vulnerabilities on the basis of risk of impact to patient harm. Here we are emphasizing, again, going back into the pre-market, that is a piece of documentation that is really important to exist from the very, very earliest stages, not something that will first get developed later on. And I think that's actually, I didn't think I was going to get through everything. That is the end of the slide deck. I do have additional, for your own ability to kind of peruse additional information with regard to what's in the appendices. But this is essentially a march through of the entire guidance. And if I have a few moments, how much time do I have left? 5? Okay. So before we get to Q&A, because I'd love to take questions, I did also want to mention that we are really very encouraged by seeing some of the legislative actions that are being taken right now as well. They are, they kind of go hand in hand, not only with our guidance recommendations, but they are aligned and they track closely with what we have expressed going back to 2018 in our medical device safety action plan, where we indicated areas that we were considering seeking additional authorities. So there's that. And then they also line very, very closely with a legislative proposal that we have made public in something called an A19 in the congressional budget justification that explains the areas where we've done a lot, through guidance. We've done a lot through our collaboration with the community, which has been wonderful, but there are areas that are distinct gaps. There are areas that we have not been successful at closing, where we believe that there would be appropriate opportunity to further close those gaps through legislative means, through additional requirements. And the Patch Act is one of the examples that I think has gotten a lot of attention from the House side, from Representative Burgess. There is a Senate side matchup to that bill from Senator Cassidy and Senator Baldwin. Again, very encouraged to see the contents of what has been put forth, and it's very closely aligned with what we're thinking is going to make a difference. So with that, I'll just open it up to any Q&A, to what time we have remaining. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, or from a how do you communicate it perspective, how do you, I guess how to communicate the balance between transparency and not revealing either, I guess the device manufacturers be concerned about competitors, or to actual attackers, revealing too much to them? Like, how do you explain and or balance that?
So that's a really good question. I'll just, your question was with regard to communicating. And so one thing I will say, I'll take the second part of it first, in terms of potential attackers. There's a lot of the prevailing thinking anyway, across government, across agencies, and across industries, is that the sharing of information, or the disclosure of such information as vulnerabilities, is not going to tell any potential hacker or attacker who wants to do harm something that they don't already know. That there is a fair amount of sharing of information that already occurs among those who are looking to do something malevolent, but rather what it does allow is it provides the means by which those who need to put protections in place, the healthcare organizations, with what they need to be doing as far as awareness of vulnerabilities, where those vulnerabilities are, and what the recommended mitigations are. So it speaks to, again, we don't do security by obscurity here. Obviously, nobody's putting out, we don't recommend putting out proof of concept code of an exploit, but the idea that going to hide something and think, because you're concerned that an attacker won't get their hands on it. Generally, there's a lot of sharing information that already happens around those individuals or nation states, if you will. To your first question, so, I think that's where there's a lot of already existing collaboration that is occurring, and communication and sharing of information, coordination across manufacturers. We have agreements with several called ISAOs, Information Sharing Analysis Organizations, that were established several years ago, specifically for medical device vulnerabilities. And that enables really the manufacturers to provide better across each other understanding of, are you seeing what I'm seeing? I've got this, it really elevates the entire ecosystem. It's that, rising tide, that, kind of tide, rising all boats, or whatever the expression is. But the ability to really try to get at not onesies, twosies, but let's see how we can impact on the ecosystem as a whole.
This is a related question, but you talk about the value of the SBOM for the customers to be able to manage their networks. There's also a sort of broader ecosystem claim to the value, which is just transparency in general. Your security posture is somewhat available to the customer even pre-purchase. And I was curious, I was asking Chris, is that one of the value propositions that the guidance is supporting? And two, by calling it labeling, will that automatically be required to be public or is that to be worked out? Like the SBOM be public?
Yeah. So with respect to your first question, yes, there's a big value proposition in there for manufacturers. I would say that especially in the past couple of years where we're dealing with these third-party software vulnerabilities, that manufacturers themselves, in terms of really trying to, in crisis mode, figure out exactly what's where within their fleet or portfolio of devices, having that information a priori would make a really big difference in terms of the ability to be more proactive. As to the labeling piece, I think that has yet to be worked out, primarily because this is a draft guidance and we certainly want to see what comment we get back.
Unfortunately, I think that's all we have.
Got it.
Thank you so much.
Sure.